There is a moment in the footage that I have watched more times than I will admit to any board of inquiry. It is 4 seconds long. In it, a man in a red tunic and a tall black bearskin, a king's guard of the royal house of Harrowgate, posted at the west rope of the palace forecourt, turns his head 9 degrees to the left. That is all, 9 degrees. In a forecourt holding 1,100 people, under a sky going purple with the last of a winter afternoon, with lanterns being lit along the whole length of the north colonnade, one man moved his eyes to a place no one else was looking, and by moving them he saved a life. I have counted the frames. I have laid the timestamps beside the statements of everyone who was near enough to have seen what he saw. And I will tell you the thing that still sits cold in my chest 3 months on. He was the only one. 1,100 people, 20 cameras, a full detail of trained men, and only Tobias Wren reacted in time. My name is Corporal Elias Ward. I served 11 years in the Queen's household before I was moved to the watch office, which is a polite way of saying I grew too slow in the knees to stand a full ceremonial post and too stubborn to leave. Now I keep the rosters and the incident logs, and when the inquiries come, I keep the truth. I was on duty the evening of the Lantern Vigil. I was not on the rope with Wren. I was 2 floors up in the long gallery that overlooks the forecourt, with a clipboard and a headset and a view of the whole event that I would have sworn that night was a complete view. It was not. That is the first thing this story taught me, and I am ashamed of how long it took to learn. A complete view is not the same as a watchful one. You can see everything and notice nothing. 20 cameras can record a crime in progress, and no living soul feel a single hair rise on the back of the neck. The eye is not the same as the attention. And attention, real attention, the kind that costs something, the kind that does not blink even when nothing appears to be wrong, is the rarest thing in any crowd, rarer than courage. I have watched brave men look straight through the thing that mattered. Let me set the evening for you, because you have to understand how ordinary it was. That is the whole horror of it. Nothing about the Lantern Vigil said danger. The vigil is one of the softer occasions on the Harrowgate calendar. It is not a coronation, not a state funeral, not the arrival of some foreign delegation that puts the whole detail on edge. It is a family evening, more or less, open to the public. On the shortest night near midwinter, the royal house lights the lanterns along the north colonnade and the great forecourt, one by one, to mark the turning of the year back toward the light. There is a children's choir. There is warm, spiced cordial handed out at trestle tables near the east gate. Queen Saralind herself walks the colonnade with a taper and touches it to the first lantern, and the crowd, and it is a good-natured crowd, families, old couples, tourists who booked their tickets months ahead, makes a sound like a long, contented exhale when the flame catches. Her Majesty is good. I do not say that as a servant flattering the hand that pays him. I say it as a man who has watched her kneel in the cold to speak to a child at eye level when protocol said she should sweep past. On vigil night the prince consort, Aldrich, walks a pace behind her, and the 2 royal children come too, Prince Joran, who is 10 and takes the whole thing very seriously and holds his own taper as though it were a sword, and Princess Malin, who is 8 and does not take it seriously at all, and once, 3 years running, tried to feed the ceremonial cordial to a palace cat. So you see the picture: lanterns, a choir, cordial, a gentle queen with a taper, 1,100 souls with their faces turned up toward the light and their phones held high, none of them thinking about anything darker than whether they would find their car in the cold afterward. If you had asked me, that evening, to name the single event on our calendar least likely to require a guardsman to break protocol and move, I would have named the vigil without hesitating. Which is exactly why it nearly happened there. I understand that now. The men who plan a wrong do not plan it for the coronation, where every second man is a plainclothes officer and the dogs sweep the drains twice. They plan it for the soft evening. They plan it for the night everyone has decided in advance is safe. Now Tobias Wren. I have to describe him carefully because the whole thing turns on the kind of man he is, and the kind of man he is does not photograph. Put him in a lineup of the detail and you could not pick him out. He is neither the tallest nor the broadest. He has one of those still, unremarkable faces that goes blank and correct under the bearskin and gives nothing away, which is exactly what the post demands and exactly why nobody, in 1,100 people, thought to watch him watching. He was 31 that winter. He had come to the household by an unusual road, not from a grand regiment but from 6 years as a ranger in the northern forests of Eldermore, the wardens who walked the deep timber alone for weeks, looking for the small wrong thing in a vast right landscape, the snare that should not be there, the print that crosses the deer trail, the smoke where there should be no fire. It is a job that trains a very particular muscle, not strength, not speed. The patience to hold your eyes on the boring, quiet, empty middle of a scene long after every instinct says nothing is happening here, look somewhere more interesting. A ranger who looks only where the action is dies young, or lets others die. The forest does not announce its dangers. It hides them in the parts of the frame the impatient eye slides over. Wren brought that muscle to the rope. I did not understand its value. I will be honest with you. I thought it made him a slightly dull guardsman. He was correct in every particular, never late, never sloppy, but he lacked the parade ground flash that gets a man noticed and promoted. On ceremonial days he was often given the least glamorous post, a rope on the flank, away from the cameras that matter, away from the royal party's line of march. That is where he was on vigil night. The west rope. The edge of the forecourt where the crowd thinned toward the service lane, where nothing ever happened, where you posted the reliable man you did not need to think about so you could spend your attention on the grand central axis where the Queen would walk. We put our most watchful man at the edge of the frame and then we all looked at the middle. I will carry that. The event began at 4:30 with the light already failing. I remember the cold, a still, hard cold, no wind, the kind that makes breath hang. I remember the choir starting, thin and clear, from the steps of the north colonnade. I remember counting the royal party out of the east door at 4:40 exactly, on schedule. The Queen in deep green, the taper already in her gloved hand, the prince consort behind, Joran with his own small taper, chin up, Malin holding her father's hand, and already I could see even from the gallery, craning to look at everything but the ceremony. I logged the time. I noted the crowd density as heavy but orderly. I noted nothing else, because there was nothing else to note. The cameras panned the forecourt in their slow, programmed sweep. Everything was exactly as it should be. And down at the west rope, in the thinning edge of the crowd where I was not looking and the cameras only glanced, Tobias Wren had already begun, though none of us knew it, to watch the two people who would test everything. I have his statement. I took it myself, 4 days later in the watch office, with a cup of tea going cold between us and the man sitting so still that twice I thought he had stopped listening. He had not. He remembers the evening with a clarity that unsettles me, because I remember it as a smear of lanterns and cold and choir, and he remembers it frame by frame, the way you remember a thing you were actually paying attention to. I am going to give you his account and mine braided together, because that is the honest shape of it. What he saw, and what the rest of us, cameras, corporals, a whole train detail, did not. The first thing Wren noticed, he told me, was a small figure that was not looking at the lanterns. You have to grasp how strange that was. On vigil night everyone looks at the lanterns. It is the entire point. A crowd of 1,100 faces all tilted the same way, all lit warm from below as the flames catch, all making the same soft sound. It is one of the most uniform things a crowd ever does. And in the middle of that uniformity, off to Wren's left, perhaps 40 feet down the rope, a child of maybe 5 or 6 was not looking up at all. She was looking back over her shoulder, again and again, at a gap in the crowd behind her, looking for someone, looking the wrong way. A child looks the wrong way for one reason mostly, Wren said to me, and turned his tea a quarter turn on the table without drinking it. She's lost sight of the person she came with. She's checking the place she last saw them, Children do it every few seconds when they're scared. Once, and then they find the person and they stop. This one didn't stop. That was the first thread. On its own, it was nothing. A slightly anxious small girl in a big crowd. There were probably 50 of those in the forecourt that night. If Wren had been an ordinary watcher, he would have filed it and moved his eyes on to something more urgent. But the ranger's muscle does not move on. It holds. It waits for the second thing. And the second thing, he told me, arrived about 90 seconds later, and it was the adult. There was a woman with the child. Wren had assumed at first glance that she was the mother, a woman of perhaps 40, well dressed for the cold in a long gray wool coat, a soft knitted hat, gloves, everything unremarkable and correct. She stood close to the girl. She had a hand resting on the girl's shoulder. To me, to the cameras, to any casual eye, they were a mother and daughter at a public celebration, one of 500 such pairs. But Wren was not watching the picture. He was watching the fit of the picture, the way a ranger watches whether a print truly belongs to the animal that should have made it. And the woman did not fit the girl. Her hand was on the child's shoulder, Wren said, but the child didn't lean into it. A frightened small one leans into the grown-up she trusts. She pushes back into the hand. She holds the coat. She wants contact. This girl was standing inside the woman's arm without touching her, angled away. Every part of her body was pointed at the gap in the crowd she kept looking back toward. The woman was holding on to her. The child was not holding on to the woman. Those are two different things, and I have never once seen them together in a real mother and her own frightened child. Not once. He said it flatly, without drama, the way he said everything. But I felt the cold go through me when I heard it, because it is the kind of observation that cannot be taught in a briefing and cannot be caught by a camera. A camera records the woman's hand on the shoulder and calls it care. Only a watching man records the absence of the child's answering grip and calls it what it was. Still, and Wren was the first to say this, still it was not proof. It was not even close. A child can be tired or sulking or newly the charge of a stepmother she does not yet love. There are 100 innocent explanations for a small girl who stands stiff inside a woman's arm. Wren knew that. He did not radio. He did not move. He did what the forest taught him. He kept his post, kept his face forward and correct so that no one, least of all the woman, would know he had marked them, and he waited for the third thing. Because a ranger knows that one wrong sign is weather, and two wrong signs is coincidence, but three wrong signs pointing the same direction is a track, and a track means something living made it, and something living that hides its track means you. The third thing was the man. He came up from the direction of the service lane, on the far side of the west rope where the crowd was thinnest, and he did not join the crowd. That was what caught Wren, not that the man was there, but the geometry of how he stood. He stopped a little apart, near the mouth of the lane, in the one place in that whole quarter of the forecourt from which you could see the woman and the girl, and also see the lane behind you at the same time. A man watching a lantern lighting does not stand where he can watch the exit. A man arranging a departure does exactly that. He was younger than the woman, perhaps 35, in a dark padded jacket, and a cap pulled low, unremarkable in every particular except one. He never once looked at the lanterns either. In a forecourt of 1,100 upturned faces, Wren had now found 3 that were not upturned. The child looking back for someone she had lost. The woman looking at nothing in particular with the flat, patient attention of a person waiting for a signal. And the man at the lane's mouth looking at the woman, then at the lane, then at the woman. And then Wren saw the phone. The woman took a phone from her coat pocket, nothing strange. Half the forecourt had a phone out, but she did not raise it to film the ceremony like everyone else. She held it low against her thigh, screen tilted down, and she looked at it. And then she looked across the 30 feet of thinning crowd directly at the man by the lane. And the man by the lane, at that same moment, took his own phone from his jacket and looked at it and looked back at her. 2 people, 30 feet apart, pretending not to know each other. reading a message at the same instant and then finding each other's eyes. That was the fourth sign, Wren told me. And 4 signs pointing one way is not weather and not coincidence. 4 is a plan. I did not know what the plan was. But I knew there was one, and I knew the child was inside it. And I knew that in a crowd that thick, moving toward that service lane, a small figure could be gone in under a minute, and no one on the central axis would ever know a thing had happened. I want to stop here and tell you what the rest of us were doing in that same minute, because it is the part I cannot forgive. I was in the gallery, logging the Queen's progress along the colonnade. She had reached the 3rd lantern. It was a lovely thing to watch, and I was watching it, and so was every camera under my control, because that is where the event was, that is where the story was, that is where 1,100 people and 20 lenses and 1 corporal with a clipboard all had their attention nailed. The central axis. The bright, correct, ceremonial middle of the frame. Down at the west rope, 40 feet from a man who had come to take a child, we had posted our most watchful guardsman and then given his post to no one's attention at all. The cameras swept past that quarter of the forecourt on their programmed rotation once every 90 seconds and moved on, because there was nothing there. There was only everything. Wren had a choice to make, and he had perhaps 90 seconds to make it, and every part of it was wrong whichever way he went. He could leave his post, an offense, on a ceremonial night that could end a guardsman's career, and cross the crowd on a suspicion he could not prove, built on a child's posture and the direction of 2 strangers' eyes. If he was wrong, he would have abandoned the west rope, frightened an innocent family, and disgraced the detail on vigil night all on a feeling. Or he could do the correct thing, the safe thing, the thing every regulation in the book told him to do. Hold his post, key his radio, report a possible concern, and let the chain of command decide. That is what a good guardsman does. That is what I would have told him to do. That is what the man beside him on the next post did, in effect, by seeing nothing and doing nothing at all. But Wren knew something the regulations did not account for. He knew how long a report takes. He knew that if he keyed his radio, it would reach me in the gallery, and I would ask him to confirm, and he would have nothing to confirm but a posture and a glance. And I, cautious, correct, career-minded Corporal Ward, would tell him to keep eyes on and wait for a supervisor to work down through the crowd from the central axis, which on vigil night, with 1,100 bodies between here and there, would take 4 minutes at the very least. 4 minutes, and the woman was already gently, with the hand that the child was not holding, beginning to turn the girl toward the service lane. Wren did not key his radio. He turned his head 9 degrees to the left, fixed the exact spot where the 3 of them stood, and stepped off his post. You must understand what that costs a man like Wren. The ceremonial post is not a job you can put down. It is a vow made visible. A king's guard on his post does not move, does not speak, does not turn aside for the rain or the tourist's insult or his own aching feet, and the whole meaning of the uniform, the whole reason a small girl's mother, in some other year, might feel her heart ease at the sight of that red tunic, rests on the certainty that the man inside it will not leave. To step off is to break the vow in front of 1,100 witnesses. And Wren stepped off without a flicker of the doubt that would have paralyzed most of us, because he had already done the sum the rest of us were too comfortable to do. A broken vow can be answered for later, at a board, in a report, over a cold cup of tea. A vanished child cannot be answered for at all. He did not run. This is the first thing the footage shows that I did not expect, and it is the first thing that told me I had underestimated him for 11 years. A running guardsman is an alarm. A running guardsman in a crowd of 1,100 sets off 1,100 hearts, turns 1,100 heads, and most dangerous of all, tells the man at the mouth of the lane that he has been seen. If the plans people knew they were marked, Wren told me, the calculation changed instantly and for the worse. A cornered scheme moves faster and rougher, and the one who pays for the speed is always the smallest person in it. So he did not run. He walked. He walked the way a guardsman walks when he has somewhere official to be, unhurried, upright, unremarkable, a man on an errand. And he threaded himself into the crowd along the west rope, and began to close the 40 feet between himself and the child, without once letting his pace betray that anything at all was wrong. 40 feet in an open room is nothing. 40 feet in a packed midwinter crowd, all of them turned the wrong way, all of them holding phones and cordial and small excited children of their own, is a country. Wren told me it was the longest walk of his life, and I believe him because I have watched it, and even in the compressed cruelty of the footage, where you know how it ends and still your chest tightens, those seconds stretch out like a held breath. He had to move without seeming to move fast. He had to keep his eyes soft, not fixed, because a fixed stare carries across a crowd, and the woman was the kind who would feel it. He had to read with every step whether the three of them had begun to move yet, and adjust, and not lose them, and not be seen to be tracking them, all at the pace of a man out for a stroll. A ranger stalking a wary animal does not walk toward it. He walks across its line, at an angle, closing the distance sideways so that at no single moment does he appear to be approaching. That is what Wren did in the forecourt. He did not walk at the child. He walked at a trestle table of cordial 10 feet past her, a guardsman going to speak to the steward, and his true path bent inward only in the last seconds, when it was too late for anyone to read it and step wrong. Up in the gallery, I saw him leave his post. I want to be truthful about this because it is the hinge of my own small shame in the affair. I saw a guardsman leave the west rope. I noted it, I actually noted it on my clipboard in my own hand. W rope post vacated 1647 Wren reason Unc. And do you know what I did with that note? I felt annoyed. I felt the flat institutional annoyance of a man who keeps rosters and sees a small breach of the rosters. I thought, what is Wren doing? He knows better than to wander off on a ceremonial night. I'll have a word. I did not think danger. I did not think he has seen something. The possibility that the dull, reliable man at the least important post might be the one person in the whole forecourt who was actually awake, that never crossed my mind. I looked at the most watchful act of the evening and I logged it as a minor infraction. Then I lifted my eyes back to the central axis, to the Queen and her taper and the fourth lantern catching, because that was where the event was, and I let the man go. The cameras did better than I did, and worse. Camera 9 on the west corner of the forecourt caught Wren's whole walk in its slow programmed sweep, for about 11 seconds, before the rotation carried its gaze back toward the colonnade and the Queen. 11 seconds of the truth, recorded faithfully, watched by no one, filed automatically to a drive in a room beneath the palace where it would sit unregarded until the inquiry. That is the thing about cameras that I did not understand until this evening taught me. A camera does not watch. It records. It has no muscle that holds on the boring middle of the frame, no instinct that leans toward the small wrong thing. It points where it is told to point, and it turns away when its program says turn, and it keeps a perfect, indifferent, useless memory of everything it saw and did not understand. 20 cameras recorded the Lantern Vigil. Every one of them had the abduction somewhere in its footage. Not one of them raised an alarm, because raising an alarm is not seeing, it is caring about what you see, and no lens has ever cared about anything. Wren was 15 feet away when the woman moved the girl. It was done so smoothly that even Wren, watching for exactly this, almost lost the moment. The woman bent her head to the child as though saying something kind, straightened, and with the hand on the girl's shoulder turned her a quarter circle so that they were both now facing the service lane rather than the ceremony. To anyone glancing over it looked like a mother deciding the little one was cold and it was time to go home. The girl's feet moved because a hand made them move. And Wren saw the child's face come round in the turn, saw it pass across the gap in the crowd she had been searching, and saw it, for the first time, do the thing that removed the last of his doubt. She looked straight at him. Not at the guardsman as a spectacle, the way children look at the red tunic and the tall fur. She looked at him the way a person drowning looks at a boat. Her eyes found his face, found the uniform, understood in one flash what it meant, and everything in her small body strained toward it while the woman's hand held her turned the other way. She did not cry out. Ren thought later that she had been told, somehow, not to make a sound, that some threat or instruction had been laid on her that she was too frightened to break. But a child cannot be told not to hope. Her whole face was one silent plea, and it was aimed at the one man in 1100 who was looking back. That was when I stopped needing proof, Ren told me. Up to then I had signs, a posture, a glance, a phone. A board could argue with signs, but a lost child does not look at a stranger like that. She looked at me like I was the last door in the room. After that, I did not care what it cost. He closed the last 15 feet at the same unhurried, murderous pace, and he arrived beside them as the woman took her first real step toward the lane. Here is where a lesser man loses everything. Here is where the training either holds or it doesn't. Because Ren could not simply seize the child, imagine it. A guardsman in a crowd of 1100 wrenching a small girl out of a well-dressed woman's arms with no explanation, no proof, on vigil night, in front of 500 phones. In 3 seconds he would be the villain of every recording in the forecourt. The woman had only to scream, "He's taking my daughter," and the crowd, primed to protect a child, would turn on the red tunic and pin him while she carried the girl down the lane in the confusion. That is the ugly cleverness of it. In a crowd, the person who screams first is believed. Ren understood that the whole thing might be lost not to force but to noise, and that his one advantage, the only card he held, was the uniform's authority and the calm that had to go with it. If he moved like a kidnapper, he would become one in the crowd's eyes. If he moved like the law, he might, for a few precious seconds, be obeyed. So he did not grab. He stepped in front of the woman squarely, unhurried, filling the mouth of the path she meant to take, and he did the most disarming thing available to a man in that uniform. He bent his knees, lowered himself to the child's height, and in a voice that the nearest bystanders later described as gentle, almost warm, he said to the little girl, not to the woman, "Hello, I've been looking for you. Your mum sent me to find you. She's just over by the gate. Shall we go to her?" It was a lie, of course. He did not know where the girl's mother was, or if her mother was even in the forecourt. But it was a magnificent lie, and I have come to think it was the finest thing he did all evening, finer even than the walk. Consider what it accomplished in one breath. It gave the child a script. Your mum sent me, that told her without a single dangerous word that the boat had come, that the guardsman knew, that she was allowed to hope out loud now. It offered the woman no accusation to scream against. He had not said this child is being taken. He had said your mum is by the gate, the most innocent sentence in the world. And it forced the woman into an impossible position, because to refuse, to say no, she is not going to any gate, she is coming with me, was to reveal in front of a crowd that she was overriding a king's guard who had simply offered to reunite a lost child with her mother. There is no innocent version of that refusal. A real mother, hearing a kind guardsman say her daughter's mum was waiting by the gate, says "Oh, thank goodness, yes, of course. Only a woman with something to hide fights it." The woman fought it. Her face, Ren said, did a thing he had seen once or twice in the forest on the faces of poachers caught at the snare. The fast, flat recalculation of someone whose plan has just met an obstacle it did not include. The warmth she had been wearing dropped for less than a second, long enough for Ren to see the cold underneath it. And then she rebuilt it, and she put her hand more firmly on the girl's shoulder, and she said, pleasantly, that there had been a misunderstanding, that this was her daughter, that they were leaving now because the little one was tired and cold, and she thanked the guardsman for his concern and made to step around him. And the child, hearing herself called my daughter, did the bravest thing anyone did that night. She was perhaps 6 years old, and she had been frightened into silence by strangers, and she broke the silence anyway. She reached out with both hands away from the woman, toward the red tunic, and she said in a small clear voice that 3 separate witnesses would later swear they heard even over the choir, "You're not my mummy. I don't know you." The mouth of the service lane, 30 feet away, was where the man in the dark jacket had been standing. When Wren looked up from the child, the man was already moving. He came fast and low along the edge of the crowd, not toward Wren but toward the woman and the girl, and Wren understood the shape of the new plan in the instant it changed. The gentle abduction had failed. The child had spoken. The crowd nearest them was beginning dimly to sense that something was off, heads starting to turn. So the man was coming to convert the quiet plan into a loud one, to close the distance, take the girl bodily between the two of them, and use the very confusion Wren had feared, the "he's taking my daughter" noise, to cover a hard extraction down the lane to whatever waited there. In a snatch, seconds are everything, and the man had judged correctly that a guardsman crouched at a child's height was a guardsman off balance, low, slow to rise. Wren was not off balance. He had crouched like a man kneeling to a child, but a ranger never puts himself where he cannot rise, and he came up out of that crouch already turning, already stepping so that his body was between the oncoming man and the girl, and he did the second disarming thing of the evening, which was to make noise himself. But the right noise, the lawful noise, the one sound that a crowd obeys before it thinks. He did not shout "help" or "stop him," which are the cries of a victim and invite 100 confused interpretations. In the flat, carrying, parade ground voice that every guardsman is drilled in, the voice built to be heard across a forecourt, he called out a single command: "Stand still, King's Guard, nobody move." I've heard it in the gallery. 2 floors up, over the choir, over 1,100 people, I heard Wren's voice roll across the forecourt, and I confess my first feeling was not alarm but a kind of scandalized disbelief. A guardsman shouting, on vigil night, breaking the sacred quiet of the ceremony. I actually rose from my chair with the intention of finding out who had so disgraced the detail. That is the measure of how completely I had misread the evening. A man was calling out that a crime was happening in our forecourt, and my instinct was to reprimand him for the noise. But the command did what commands do. It froze the crowd for the half-second Wren needed. The nearest bystanders stopped. The choir faltered. And the man in the dark jacket, hearing King's Guard ring out and seeing heads turning toward him from every side, made the only calculation left to him. He broke off. He did not reach the girl. He veered, shoved through the loosening edge of the crowd, and ran for the mouth of the service lane. And this is where the account stops being only Wren's, because now other people were awake. Now the cameras that had been sweeping the middle were being cried at to turn. Now the evening became, for the first time, a thing more than one man could see. Wren did not chase him. I want to be clear about that because it is the choice that separates a guardsman from a hero in a cheaper story. Every instinct in a younger man says run him down. Wren had the child. The child was the whole point. To chase the man was to leave the girl with the woman, and the woman, he knew, was the more dangerous of the two, patient, cold, still standing right there with her hand yet on the small shoulder, still capable of melting into the crowd with her prize if Wren's attention left for 1 second. So he let the man run. He kept his body between the woman and the lane. He kept one hand gently, coming to rest on the girl's back to draw her behind him, and he began, at last, to do the thing I should have made possible from the start. He raised his voice toward the gallery, toward the cameras, toward me, and called for the forecourt to be closed. Now the machine woke up. Now, 4 minutes too late to have mattered if Wren had waited for it, the detail moved. I was already at the gallery rail with the radio in my hand, and I did the one useful thing I did all evening. I called the lockdown. Every gate, every lane. The service lane sealed at its far end, the east and west vehicle gates dropped, the whole forecourt closed like a fist. It is a protocol we drill for and pray never to use, and we used it that night. And the reason we could use it in time, the only reason, is that a guardsman had bought us the seconds by moving before he was told to, on a suspicion no procedure would have credited. And here is the midpoint of the whole affair, the place where I stopped thinking of it as one man's good instinct at a rope, and began to understand it as something colder and more deliberate. Because when the man in the dark jacket reached the far end of the service lane, he found it sealed, and there, blocking it, was a plain gray panel van, engine running, that had been backed up to the service door under a delivery pass none of us had thought to question, because a delivery van at the service lane on an event evening is the most invisible thing in the world. It had been there since before the ceremony began. It was not there to deliver anything. It was there to receive. They had not come to snatch any child. They had come for a particular one. It took the investigation 2 weeks to piece that part together, and I will not pretend Wren understood it in the forecourt. In the forecourt, he understood only that a child needed to be got safe, which is all a guardsman ever needs to understand. But the inquiry filled in the rest, and it changed how I read every second of the footage afterward, so I will give it to you now rather than make you wait for it as we had to. The girl's name was Nella. She was 6. She was, on paper, no one in particular, the granddaughter of a widow named Hesta Marlowe who kept accounts for a shipping concern down at the river wharves, an ordinary woman in an ordinary trade. But some months before the vigil, Hesta Marlowe had noticed, in the account she kept, a pattern of goods that were paid for twice and delivered once, of manifests that did not match holds, and being an honest woman with a stubborn streak she had not looked away from it. She had gone, quietly, to the Crown's revenue men, and she had given them the ledgers, and the ledgers had begun to unravel a smuggling ring that ran contraband up the river under cover of legitimate freight, a ring with money enough, and reach enough, to own a delivery pass to a palace service lane and a gray van that no one would question. They could not reach Hesta Marlowe herself. The revenue men had put her somewhere safe. So they had reached for the thing that would make an honest grandmother forget every stubborn scruple she owned. They had studied the family. They had learned that on vigil night, Nella was to be brought to the forecourt by a neighbor in the great anonymous crowd, and that in that crowd a well-dressed woman with a kind face and a soft voice might, with the right moment and the right lie, become the person the neighbor trusted to hold the little one's hand while she fetched the cordial. The whole scheme rested on the crowd's blindness, on the certainty that in 1,100 people all looking the other way, a child could be lifted out of the world between one lantern and the next, and that by the time anyone raised the alarm, a gray van would be gone into the river district with the one bargaining chip that could buy a whole ring its freedom. Hesta Marlowe, they knew, would trade every ledger in the kingdom to get her granddaughter back. Honest people always will. That is the lever cruel people reach for. None of that was visible in the forecourt. That is the point I keep returning to, the point that frightens me. Everything about the plan was designed to be invisible. The kind woman, the ordinary coat, the delivery van, the soft evening, the crowd that had decided in advance it was safe. It was invisible to 1,100 people. It was invisible to 20 cameras. It was invisible to me, a trained man whose one job that night was to see. The scheme was a masterpiece of camouflage, and it would have worked. It very nearly did work, against everything the palace had, except for one thing its authors could not have planned for and did not know to fear. That at the least important post, on the flank, away from the cameras that mattered, someone had put a man who used to walk the deep forests alone, and who had never once in his life learned to look only where the light was. Back in the forecourt, in the minutes after the lockdown, it looked for a little while as though it was over. And this is the part I have to tell carefully, because it is the part where it very nearly slipped through our fingers even then, with the gates down and the alarm raised and everyone at last awake. The man in the dark jacket, finding the lane sealed and the van boxed in by the drop gate, was taken. 2 guardsmen from the east detail had him against the wall before he reached the van's door, and there was a brief, ugly scuffle that the child, thank God, did not see, because Wren had already turned her away from it and put his own red bulk between her and the whole world. The van driver gave himself up without a fight the moment he saw the gate come down. He was a hired man, frightened, in over his head. Within 4 minutes of Wren's shout, we had 2 men in custody, a sealed forecourt, a gray van going nowhere, and a small girl standing safe in the lee of a guardsman's coat. The radio net was jubilant in the clipped way of men who have just been very frightened and are pretending they were not. I remember thinking, at the gallery rail, "It's done." He caught it. We closed it in time. We had not. We had caught the man and the van and the driver. We had not caught the woman. She had used the 4 minutes better than any of us. The instant Wren's shout went up and the man broke for the lane, the crowd near the west rope had done what crowds do. It had convulsed, surged, turned, become for half a minute a churning mass of frightened people trying to see and trying to leave at the same time. Every eye that had at last woken up was pointed at the running man, at the guardsman's raised voice, at the scuffle by the van. And in that churn, the woman in the gray coat had simply let go of the child, stepped backward into the press of bodies, and become one more anonymous, well-dressed, frightened-looking spectator among 500. She did not run. Running would have marked her. She did the far cleverer thing. She stood still and looked alarmed and let the panic she had caused wash over and hide her. When the lockdown fell and we began, gate by gate, to hold and check the crowd, she was inside the forecourt with everyone else, indistinguishable from any anxious mother, ready to give a false name and a tearful account and be waved through with the rest. And here is the false dawn, the trap that nearly closed on us at the very moment we thought we were safe. Because the crisis, as far as the whole machine of the palace was now concerned, was over. The child was recovered. 2 men were in custody. The threat had a face and the face was in handcuffs. Every protocol we have is built to stand down once the identified threat is neutralized, and every man on that net was aching to stand down, because a lockdown of 1,100 cold, frightened people on a ceremonial night is its own kind of disaster. And the pressure from the crowd, from the shivering families, from the disrupted ceremony, from 100 practical mercies. The pressure to open the gates and let the good people go home was enormous, and on its face, entirely reasonable. A senior officer had come down to the forecourt. He had the man, the van, the driver, the rescued girl. He was being told, urgently and from every side, that we were holding 1,100 innocent people in the freezing dark for no further reason. And he was, I could hear on the net, about to give the order to open the west gate and release the crowd. If he had, she would have walked out with them. She would have vanished into the city, and with her would have vanished the only person who could have led the revenue men up the chain to whoever had bought the delivery pass and hired the van and studied a widow's grandchild. The mind behind the whole thing, the one who was never going to be near a service lane on the night. We would have counted it a triumph. We would have gone home saying the guard caught it in time. And the true architect would have been sipping something warm across the river within the hour, already planning the second attempt, because a ring that will reach for a child once will reach again. The only person who knew she was still there was Wren, and Wren was not on the net. He was crouched by a service door with a 6-year-old's face buried in his shoulder, 100 feet from the officer about to make the mistake, with no way to be heard over the clamor of everyone insisting the danger was past. This is the moment I am least proud of and most grateful for. Wren could not reach the officer, but Wren knew me, knew that Corporal Ward was up in the gallery with the whole forecourt below him and a radio in his hand, and he did the only thing left. He lifted his face from the child, found the gallery rail with his eyes, found me, and he held up one gloved hand, and with it he made a sign. Not a wild wave, not a shout I could not have heard anyway. He made the old ranger's field sign the northern wardens use across a distance where no voice carries, the flat hand, palm down, pressed slowly toward the ground and held there. Hold. Do not move. The quarry is still in the field. I did not know it was a ranger's sign. I did not know what it meant at all. But I knew Tobias Wren, and I knew that a man who had just been proven, in front of the whole detail, to be the only one who saw the thing coming, was looking straight up at me across a forecourt and telling me, with everything in his body, not yet. I keyed the radio. I said, and my voice on the recording is not steady, gallery to forecourt command. Hold the lockdown. Do not open the west gate. There is a second party. Repeat, hold all gates. We are not clear. The officer's voice came back sharp, asking me on what authority, on what evidence, when the threat was in custody and 1,100 citizens were freezing, and I had no evidence. I had a guardsman's flat hand pressed toward the ground and 11 years of watching that same guardsman be right about small, quiet things when louder men were wrong. So I said the only true thing I had. I said, on the authority of the man who saw the first one, he says we are not clear. I believe him. There was a silence on the net that seemed to last a winter. Then the officer held the gates. And so we came to the hardest hour of the evening, the one the cameras are worst at and a watchful man is best at. Finding one still, calm, well-dressed woman among 1,100 still, calm, well-dressed people, all of them cold, all of them wanting to go home, none of them the one we wanted except her. This was not a chase. A chase would have been easy. This was a search for camouflage that had gone deliberately, perfectly inert, a poacher standing motionless in the trees, betting that if she did not move, the eye would slide over her the way it slides over everything that does not move. And she would have won that bet against any of us. She very nearly won it against Wren. Because Wren, remember, had never seen her face for more than the flat second when her warmth dropped. He had watched a coat, a hat, a posture, a hand on a shoulder, the fit asterisk of a thing, not a portrait. Ask him to describe her and he could give you the gray wool and the knitted hat and the way she stood, but the hat was in her pocket now, and the coat was one of 100 gray coats in a midwinter crowd, and she had let her face go slack and ordinary and afraid like every other face. The camouflage that had hidden her from us would have hidden her from Wren too. He knew it. He told me afterward that standing there with the child, watching the search fan out across the forecourt, he felt for the first time all evening that he might lose, that he had seen the whole thing coming, and stopped the snatch, and held the gates, and might still stand there helpless while the mind of it walked out through the west gate the moment someone's nerve broke. It was the child who caught her. It was Nella. Wren had kept the girl close through all of it, and he had done, in those long minutes, a quiet and human thing that the footage does not fully show, and that I only learned from the girl's own account weeks later. He had not simply held her. He had talked to her, low and steady, the whole time telling her she was safe now, that she had been the bravest person in the whole forecourt, that the men who frightened her were caught and could not touch her, that her grandmother loved her and would see her very soon. He had, in other words, brought a terrified child back from the edge of her fear by treating her as a person and not a parcel to be guarded. And somewhere in that talking gently without frightening her, he had asked her, "The lady who held your hand, do you remember anything about her? Anything at all? Not to press her, just if she could." And Nella, 6 years old, who had been too frightened to scream but not too frightened to hope, thought about it, and remembered the one thing a small child notices that no adult witness ever records. She said the lady had a red bird. It made no sense to Wren until she showed him, touched the back of her own small hand, near the wrist where a glove ends. A pin. A brooch. The woman had worn, at the collar of the gray coat, a small enamel brooch shaped like a bird, red, the kind of ordinary pretty thing 100 women might wear and no witness would think to mention. But a 6-year-old, held by the hand by a frightening stranger, staring down and away in her fear, had spent long minutes with her eyes level with that collar, and the one bright thing in her whole terrifying evening had been a little red bird, and she had not forgotten it. Wren stood up. He lifted the child in his arms so she could see, and he said to her gently, "If you see the red bird again, you don't say anything and you don't point. You just squeeze my hand. Can you do that?" And she nodded against his shoulder. And a king's guard of the royal house of Harrowgate, in a forecourt of 1,100 people, with a rescued child on his hip, and a whole details failed search churning around him, began, slowly, to walk the crowd, not looking at faces, which lie, but at collars, which do not, while the one witness in the kingdom who knew what to look for rode on his arm and watched for a small red bird. It took 9 minutes. I have the timestamps. 9 minutes of a guardsman carrying a child slowly along the held crowd, unhurried, unremarkable, a man reuniting a lost girl with her family. That was the story his walk told, and it was a good enough story that the woman, watching him from wherever she stood, would have read it as harmless right up until it was not. He did not scan. Scanning carries. He walked as if he already knew where he was going, and he let the child do the seeing, and he felt at last, in the 9th minute, the small hand tighten on his. She squeezed his hand. Wren did not stop, did not turn his head, did not change his pace by a single beat. He walked 3 more steps past the woman. She was standing near the base of the north colonnade, hatless now, coat open, a picture of a shaken bystander waiting to be allowed home, and only then, having placed himself between her and the nearest gate, did he turn. The red bird was at her collar exactly where a frightened 6-year-old had spent the worst minutes of her life staring at it. He had walked the whole crowd and let the only reliable witness point the way, and now he stood 4 feet from the mind that had tried to steal her, with the child safe on his arm and the gate at his back. And the woman looked at him and understood. In the flat second, her warmth dropped for the second and last time that evening, that the dull man at the least important post had found her after all. She did not scream this time. There was no crowd to turn, no lie left that would hold. She looked, Wren said, almost relieved, in the way of people whose long tension finally breaks even into defeat. He did not raise his voice. He did not seize her, because there were officers 10 feet away now, and a guardsman with a child in his arms does not brawl. He simply said quietly, so that only she and the nearest men could hear, "The red bird." She remembered the red bird. And then louder level to the officers, "This is the second party. This is the one who held the child." They took her without a struggle, and that the quiet of it, the total absence of drama at the very end, is the thing that tells you what kind of victory it was. It was not won by force. Wren never struck a blow all evening. It was won by attention, by a walk instead of a run, by a lie kindly told and a child gently kept, and a small red bird remembered, by a man who refused at every single fork, the loud easy move and chose the quiet exact one. The forest had taught him that the animal is not taken by the hunter who charges. It is taken by the one who was already watching before it, knew it was being hunted. When the woman was led away, Wren finally let himself feel the weight of the child in his arms, and he carried her, not to a supervisor, not to the incident post, but to the east gate where, it turned out, the frantic neighbor who had lost her and Hesta Marlowe herself, brought in a fast Crown car the moment the alarm reached the revenue men, were waiting behind the line with their hearts in their mouths. I was down the stairs and across the forecourt by then. I saw the handover. I will not describe the grandmother's face when the guardsman set the little girl down, and the child ran the last 6 feet on her own legs, because some things are not mine to put into a report. I will only say that Tobias Wren stood back the moment the child was safe in her grandmother's arms, came to attention out of pure habit, and looked, for the first time all evening, faintly lost. A man who had done the one thing that mattered and did not know what to do with himself now that it was done. Hesta Marlowe could not speak. She reached out one hand and gripped his gloved hand hard and held it, and he let her, and neither of them said anything at all. Then he went back to his post. I want you to sit with that, because it is the truest sentence in this whole account. He went back to the west rope. The child was safe, The two men were in custody, the woman was taken, the forecourt was ours again, and the guardsman who had done all of it, uncredited, unthanked, unphotographed, simply squared his bearskin, walked back to the least important post on the flank, took up his stance, fixed his eyes forward, and stood the rest of his watch as if nothing had happened. That is the part no camera thought to record. The lockdown lifting, the crowd flowing out grateful and unaware, the lanterns still burning all down the colonnade because someone, at some point, had quietly gone on lighting them, and one man in a red tunic, back at his rope, guarding the empty edge of the frame that everyone else still ignored. The inquiry began the next morning, and it is where my part of the story turns from witness to something more like penance. They convened a board, as they must after any breach of ceremonial protocol, and the breach on the table was Wren's. A guardsman had abandoned his post on a state occasion without an order. That is a serious matter, and the board was right to take it seriously, and I understood, even as it turned my stomach, why the first question they asked was not how did he see it, but how dare he leave his post. An institution survives on the certainty that its men do not leave their posts. If a guardsman may step off the rope whenever his private judgment tells him something is wrong, then the rope means nothing, and the next man who steps off may be wrong, and a wrong stepping off in the wrong moment could cost more than it saves. The board was not being cruel. It was guarding the thing that makes the whole uniform mean anything. I have come to respect that, even now. But the board had one advantage that Wren in the forecourt had not. It had the footage, all of it. 20 cameras, 6 hours, every frame preserved on the drives beneath the palace. And the board did the thing that no one had done on the night itself. It watched, slowly, backward and forward, frame by frame. It gave to the recorded evening the patient, holding attention that a single ranger had given to the living one. And in doing so it proved, beyond any argument, the thing I have been telling you from the first sentence. It proved that only he saw it. They found the child on the footage at 16:31, looking back over her shoulder for a grandmother's neighbor she had already lost. They found the woman's hand come to rest on the small shoulder at 16:33. They found the man arrive at the mouth of the lane at 16:38 and stand where he could watch the exit. They found the two phones lift at 16:41, 30 feet apart, two strangers reading one message. It was all there. Every camera had it. The whole plan, from the first wrong glance to the gray van's open door, was recorded in full, faithful, indifferent detail by 20 machines that saw everything and understood nothing, and by a full detail of trained men and a corporal in the gallery, and 1,100 citizens, not one of whom, in 22 minutes of a crime assembling itself in plain sight, felt a single thread of alarm. Except one. At 16:33 on camera 9, in the corner of the west rope, the board found a guardsman turn his head 9 degrees to the left, and from that moment the footage tells a second story braided through the first, a story you can only see once you know to look for it, the story of one man tracking the thing the other 19 cameras were merely recording, his head turning, his stillness that was not idleness but a hunter's hold, his unhurried angled walk across the crowd while everyone else's eyes, and every other lens, stayed nailed to the bright ceremonial middle. The board watched a room full of seeing and one man's watching, side by side on the same drives, and the difference between them was the whole difference between a child taken and a child saved. The senior member of the board, an old brigadier named Colonel Hance, a man I had always found flint-hard and found, that week, to be something better than hard, said one thing when the last reel had run. He said, "Every camera we own saw this. Every man in that forecourt was looking at it. And the only reason there is a living child at her grandmother's table this morning is that we happen to post, at the least important rope on the field, the one man among us who never learned to look only where the light is. That is not luck. That is not a breach to be punished. That is the whole of what we are asterisk for." They did not punish him, and this is the part that says most about Wren, and about the quiet register of honor this whole niche of men lives inside. They did not at first publicly reward him either because Wren asked them not to. He was called before the board expecting a reprimand and offered instead a commendation, a promotion, a citation to be read on parade. And he declined the parade. He asked in his flat forest voice that the matter be kept as quiet as the work had been. He said, "I was in the room, I heard it, that a guardsman who saves a child in order to be seen saving a child has already stopped being the kind of guardsman who would have seen the child in the first place." He said the reward he wanted was to be left at his post. I have thought about that sentence more than any other in this whole affair. The reward he wanted was to be left at his post. I sat through the whole footage review with the board, because I was a witness and because, I think, some part of me needed to serve the sentence of watching it. And I will tell you what it is like to sit in a dim room and watch 20 cameras record a child nearly being taken while you, on the night, saw nothing. It is not like watching a film. In a film you are meant to see the danger. The camera leans toward it, the music warns you, the frame is built to point your eye. This was the opposite. This was the truth of how danger actually moves in the world, which is quietly at the edge, wearing an ordinary coat, doing nothing a single frame could indict. I watched camera after camera hold the woman and the child in plain view and felt, each time, the flat indifference of the lens, and I understood at last that the machines we had trusted to keep the forecourt safe were never keeping anything safe at all. They were keeping a record. There is a difference, and the difference is a living, caring, disciplined attention, and we had outsourced it to glass and called ourselves protected. I asked Wren later, over another cold cup of tea in the watch office, how he had learned to see the way he sees. I expected some account of training, some drill I could write into a protocol and hand to the next detail. He gave me no such thing. He said the forest had taught him one lesson, and it had taught it hard, in his second year as a young warden. When he had walked a long trail past a snare line, he did not see because he was tired and cold, and the light was failing, and there was nothing interesting in that stretch of timber, and a fox had died slowly in a wire he could have found had he been watching the dull ground instead of the pretty ridge. He said he had gone back and cut every snare on that line the next day and had never in the years since let his eyes rest only where the interest was. Attention is a debt, he said. You pay it in the boring hours on the empty posts, watching the quiet nothing so that on the 1 hour it matters you have it to spend. Most men spend it early on whatever's bright and have nothing left when the edge moves. I keep mine. That's all. It isn't a gift. It's just a bill I decided to pay. I have never forgotten that. It is the least romantic account of heroism I have ever heard, and I believe it is the only true one. He did not save the child because he was braver than the rest of us or quicker or better with his hands. He saved her because he had spent 11 years on 100 dull ropes, refusing to let his attention wander to the bright center, paying the debt in the empty hours, so that when the one evening in 1,000 arrived, he had something the rest of us had already spent. We had all been in the forecourt. We had all been looking. Only one of us had kept the coin. Queen Saralind heard the whole of it within a day, because she hears everything that happens in her forecourt, and because a thing had happened in it that no sovereign could be kept from. She did not summon Wren to a great hall. She is not that kind of queen, and this was not that kind of deed. She came, one gray morning that week, down to the forecourt herself, in a plain coat with the prince consort at her side, and she walked the west rope to the least important post on the flank, and she stood in front of the guardsman who had told a board he only wanted to be left where he was, and she granted him exactly that, and something more. She did not make a speech. She said quietly, so that only Wren and the 2 men nearest could hear, that she had watched the footage, that she had made herself watch all of it, the 22 minutes when no one saw and the 9 when only he did, and that she had understood, watching it, something she wanted to say to his face rather than send in a citation. She said that a kingdom is not kept safe by the men who guard the bright center where everyone is already looking. It is kept safe by the ones willing to guard the dim edges where no one is looking at all, hour after hour, year after year, for the one evening in 1,000 when the edge is where the wrong thing comes. She said she had always known in the abstract that this was true. She had not, until that week, known the face of the man who made it true. Now she did. And then Queen Saralind did the thing that the palace remembers, the thing that closed the whole affair. She did not raise Wren out of his post to some grander station, which would have been the ordinary reward and the wrong one. She left him on the west rope. But she gave an order quietly, that from that day the flank posts of the household, the dim edges, the least important ropes, the corners where nothing ever happens, would no longer be given to the reliable men no one needed to think about. They would be given to the most watchful men in the detail, and held in honor as the hardest posts of all, because the night had proven what a forest ranger had always known and a whole palace had forgotten, that the danger does not come to the center where it is expected. It comes to the edge, into the part of the frame the impatient eye slides over, and it is stopped, if it is stopped at all, by the one man disciplined enough to keep watching the quiet nothing long after everyone else has decided the quiet nothing is safe. I should tell you, too, about the man in the dark jacket and the driver, because a story that leaves its loose men unaccounted for is not a finished story, and I have promised myself this one will be finished. The driver was a river man named Corvin Slake, hired for the evening, and told only that he was to wait at the service lane and open the doors when a package was brought to him, and drive it to an address across the water. He swore, and I came to believe him, that he had been told the package was goods, not a child, and that when he understood in the sealed lane, with the gates coming down, what the gray van had truly been backed up to receive, something in him had simply refused, and he had put his hands up and been glad of the wall against his back. He gave the crown everything he had, which was little, but the little was a name and the name was a thread. The man in the dark jacket gave nothing. He was the ring's own, hard and silent, and he went to answer for it in the proper place with his mouth shut. It did not matter. Between the driver's thread and the woman's confession and Hesta Marlowe's unblocked ledgers, the crown had more threads than it needed. A scheme that had been invisible because every piece of it was ordinary became, once one watching man pulled the first piece loose, a thing that came apart in the hands like wet paper. The ring came apart in the weeks after. The woman with the red bird, faced with the choice of speaking or standing alone before the crown's revenue men, spoke. She was the sort who had always worked for money, and had none of the ring's loyalty in her, and what she gave them led up the river, past the hired van driver and the frightened man at the lane, to the merchant house that had bought a delivery pass, and studied a widow's grandchild, and thought a soft evening, and a blind crowd would let them steal a lever to buy their freedom. Hesta Marlowe's ledgers, unblocked now by any fear for the child they could no longer threaten, did the rest. Honest accounting in the end undid them, as it had started to before they reached for the little girl, but they would have escaped it, all of it, if a gray van had left the service lane that evening with Nella inside. Everything the crown untangled after, every arrest, every recovered ledger, every barge searched at the wharves, all of it hung on 4 seconds at a rope, on a man turning his head 9 degrees to the left. Nella is well. That is the first thing anyone should be told, and the thing I put last only because I did not want to leave it behind us. She is 7 now. She lives with her grandmother still, and she is, by every account, a bright and stubborn child who will grow into a bright and stubborn woman. And once, on a bright day this spring, she was brought back to the palace forecourt, not on a night of crowds, but a quiet morning to see, she said, the tall soldier with the fur hat. Wren was on the west rope. He is always on the west rope. He asked to stay, and the queen let him. And a king's guard of the royal house of Harrowgate, who does not move and does not speak and does not turn aside for anything, saw a small figure come toward him across the empty cobbles, and he broke his stillness the only way the whole affair had ever asked him to break it, not for a shout, not for an insult, not for any of the loud things men imagine test a guardsman, but for the quiet thing at the edge of the frame that only a watching man ever sees. He came down to her height. he said hello. And this time it was true. I keep the incident log still. I have written up the Lantern Vigil a dozen ways for a dozen boards, and the official version is accurate and complete and says nothing at all, the way official versions do. So I have written this one for myself, and for anyone who ever stands a dim post on a soft night and wonders whether the watching matters when nothing ever seems to happen. It matters. It is the only thing that matters. 20 cameras recorded everything that evening and saved no one. 1,100 people watched the lanterns and missed the child. A trained corporal in a gallery logged the one heroic act of the night as a minor infraction. And a single guardsman at the least important post in the kingdom kept his eyes on the quiet nothing until the quiet nothing moved, and moved himself, before anyone told him to, and was right, and was the only one. The cameras caught what everyone else missed, but a camera only catches. It was one guard who saw it and one guard who reacted in time. He is out there now on the west rope, watching the edge of the frame. I hope, for all our sakes, we go on posting men like him where the light is thin. The night we stop is the night the quiet nothing wins.